All right, so we're looking at Sonnet 29, I Think of Thee, by Elizabeth Barrett-Browning. What does everybody think that she's trying to say in this poem?
I think that we're looking at a poem here that comes from a collection of sonnets that are just there to completely declare this undying love and adoration for her beloved. Now, he's not mentioned by name, but the real personal feel to it all, it's inescapable. She's got so much love, affection, desire for this person that she holds so dear.
Okay.
I think one of the most interesting lines in terms of the context, so knowing that Elizabeth Barrett-Browning was married to Robert Browning, he read her poetry before he actually met her, and she had a bit of a kind of fear that he actually admired her more as a writer than her as a kind of human being. So where she says, "I will not have my thoughts instead of thee," she's almost saying that she wants him as a physical presence, him, not just him the writer, and she wants him to feel the same about her, I think.
Yeah, with that introduction, "I think of thee!" exclamation mark. It's a complete outpouring of everything, affection. That feeling you get when you see someone or something for the first time and it takes your breath away. That feeling Miss Park gets when she walks into Mr. Lewis's classroom and it's there. "I think of thee." That first person pronoun. "I think of thee." I think of you. You cannot escape it. And it's actually quite interesting to think about. Contextually with this poem, she wrote these originally for a private audience. She wrote these for herself, and it was only when Browning, her husband, got his hands on them, that she was persuaded to share them with the world.
And you can see that they are very personal, because it's quite the imagery towards the end is quite sexual, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the burst shattered everywhere, and it's quite disjointed in terms of the syntax actually as well.
Yes.
So things like, the caesura, use of that kind of particular structure in lots of the lines, it almost seems like a kind of impromptu outpouring rather than sometimes a sonnet can seem very structured and very planned, and it doesn't feel like that. It feels very kind of, it flows with lots of that enjambment, run-on lines and things like that as well.
It does flow, but one thing I think is quite interesting if you look at that from another perspective is there are elements of completely disjointed punctuation. I mean, she's so playful with her comma hyphen in a number of places, the exclamation marks, the semicolons. I think almost you could say that disjointedness is a mirror of the explosion of feelings and emotions that she's experiencing.
Yeah, and that word burst, the way it's made to stand out on that line after the hyphen.
I think it's
really powerful.
I think like a different interpretation of this as well is that there's a lot of codependency. Particularly, there's a lot of imagery about a vine kind of wrapping itself around a tree.
Yeah, and a vine won't live without a tree.
Yeah, and I think that idea of it's almost kind of, there's slightly darker sort of claustrophobic elements there.
Yeah.
The idea of breathing within thy shadow. So, if you kind of approach this from a more sort of modern, perhaps a feminist perspective, is this idea that it's quite a negative portrayal of the female's female's position within that relationship, that she's very dependent upon him, like we were saying. That idea of, the sort of the twine around the tree, but he is the strong tree, thy trunk all bare.
But I do think it's interesting, and I agree, there's definitely kind of a feminist reading in there, but she does say twine and bud, and bud kind of suggests new life. So perhaps even though she is dependent on him, and perhaps it is an unhealthy codependence, but it also suggests that he allows her to flourish, perhaps, and to kind of grow. But again, I think that is an interesting reading to look at it in a more kind of slightly negative way.
How about the rhyme in this? Do we notice anything structurally about the use of couplets? We've got that A, B, B, A to begin with, bud with wood, that sort of half rhyme, I suppose, and tree and C. Anything we could explore with the couplets?
Is this Petrarchan rather than Shakespearean?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So a Shakespearean sonnet would end with a rhyming couplet, but as this doesn't, we know it's a Petrarchan sonnet, which is actually a more archaic, more old-fashioned form even than a Shakespearean sonnet.
Why do you think she's chosen to do it as a sonnet?
I think, yeah, obviously we've got the conventions, haven't we? We've got the associations, all those cliche things that we can say about sonnets and love. One thing that's jumped out at me there is at the end of line 10, 12 and 14, look at that ending, the, you know, you. Again, going back to what I was saying at the start, there's this
It's almost obsessive, isn't it?
it is, obsessive feeling towards him. It's him that ends every line, ends the poem, starts and ends the day thinking of him, much like this poem starts and ends with that exclamation of thee.
What do you think about the meaning that it starts with I think of thee, but it ends at the final line with I do not think of thee, I am too near thee? Because that's quite ambiguous, I think. What do you think, Judy?
But I think because when it gets to the end, she's so overpowered by his physical presence, isn't she? So it's like the rest of it, she's thinking about him coming, and then he arrives.
What's quite good there is like on that final line, it's I no longer need to think of you. You are here.
Yes.
You're no longer this thing that I have to imagine.
Yes, exactly. And it's like the reality of him being there completely overpowers all her kind of
all her senses.
Yeah, the internal turmoil she's been going through, thinking about him, missing him, wanting him to be there.
Yeah, and look at the rhythm and the metre. Look at almost, I think, most of those words, if not all of them, that final line, monosyllabic. There's none of this flowery, sort of Latinate, polysyllabic language. The syllables in those words are almost as simplistic as the message she's sharing.
Yes.
I don't need the rest of this flowery language anymore. You're here. I've got you. It's as simple as that.
That was quite nice.
Thank you.
It's all right.
And the natural imagery reinforces that, doesn't it? Because the fact that she's sticking to those kind of simple, natural images rather than having really complex imagery. She's just basically got one image in there, hasn't she?
Yeah, essentially. I mean, obviously echoing everything we'd expect of a poet writing in the Romantic era.
Yes.
That complete reliance on the natural world around her.
And I think it represents the idea, because it's wild vines and the straggling green, the idea of, while the sonnet is very, controlled, actually within it, the use of the lots of caesura and the exclamations and the dashes and this imagery of the wildness and the straggling, this idea of a loss of control almost, but kind of giving herself up to that loss of control, which, being a Victorian poem is perhaps representing how, society and declarations of love were very constrained, but the sort of turbulent emotions within it were still wild and straggling. People still had those emotions, but wanted to kind of exclaim her love, but
then maybe contain them within the structure of a sonnet.
Yeah.
I was just thinking back to what you were saying, Mr. Barber, about the kind of feminist reading of it. You could sort of suggest something about her use of imperative, though, that perhaps there is an element of her having a bit of power over him at certain points. She says, renew thy presence, rustle thy boughs, drop heavily down. There is an element of kind of her telling him what to do, almost telling him what she needs from him.
But then alternatively as well, I think it's possibly this idea of that her control is over herself as opposed to over him. For example, in the lines, I will not have my thoughts instead of thee. She's going to have him, but then she goes on, who art dearer, better. She uses those comparatives, so she's very much, I think, put him up on a pedestal, so she's fighting for him, but she still seems to sort of regard him as...
it is about wanting the physical presence rather than it's almost like I don't want to be left with my intellectual self. I want you to kind of ravish me and take me out of my intellectual self and make
Miss Park,
my physical self, my physical awareness of you alive. That's where I actually want to be. I don't want to be in that.
Yeah, and I think again, if you look at some of the dynamic verbs, the sort of dynamism, if that's not a word, if it's not, it should be. Where she's saying all these things, there is that pouring out of, I need this, I want this, I need you. Yeah. It's a top poem. I think in 14 lines she's managed to get a lot in there. So join us next time for another English Department Does Poetry.